Welcome everyone to this webinar for Reset Mind Sciences, a wholly owned subsidiary of ASX listed Little Green Pharma, which trades under ASX ticker code LGP. Shortly, I'll introduce Reset Mind Sciences Chief Operating Officer, Dr. Leon Warne, who will provide an overview of the business, its planned demerger from Little Green Pharma, and its plans to raise capital. At the conclusion of the presentation, Leon will be on hand to answer any questions you may have. So get your questions ready and think about what you would like to ask Leon during the Q&A session. Submit them using the Q&A button at the box at the bottom of the screen, and I'll put them to Leon during the Q&A session. Okay, let's get started. I would now like to introduce Reset Mind Sciences Chief Operating Officer, Dr. Leon Warne, who will run through a formal presentation and be on hand to answer any questions you may have at the end. Leon, over to you.
Thanks, David, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for attending today's webinar. It's exciting times for Reset Mind Sciences and the broader psychedelic market in Australia and internationally. I hope that this webinar will provide you with a good understanding, not just of our business, but the psychedelics landscape we find ourselves in. I'll also provide an overview of Reset's demerger from Little Green Pharma and the proposed $2 million capital raise, but more about that later. Let's get started. Next slide, please. So here we have the obligatory disclaimer slide. Next slide, please. I'll now provide an overview of the fascinating history of psychedelics and its renaissance, an overview of the Australian market, followed by an update on Reset and its business model. Next slide, please. So while psychedelics have been used for hundreds, if not thousands of years by humans, for context, it's important to take a look back at the second half of the 20th century and some of the influential figures of the Western world and how they shaped and influenced the way we view these drugs in society. If we look at Swiss chemist Robert Hofmann, he's known for being the first to synthesize, indeed ingest, and learn of the psychedelic effects of LSD. Hoffman's team also isolated, named, and synthesized the principal psychedelic mushroom compounds, psilocybin and psilocin. American psychologist and former Harvard psychedelics researcher Timothy Leary was well known throughout the 1960s for his strong advocacy of psychedelic drugs. He coined the counterculture term, turn on, tune in, drop out, as many of us heard in the 1960s, and was dubbed by President Nixon as the most dangerous man in America. Finally, you have President Nixon himself, who in 1971 declared the war on drugs in America, following the signing of an act to amend the Public Health Services Act. And this was really the final nail in the coffin for research and new knowledge generation in this space at that time. Next slide, please. This slide is of a quote from a 2016 Harper's Magazine article from the former domestic policy advisor to President Nixon, who stated that the war on drugs was created as a political tool to fight blacks and hippies and was purely designed to help Nixon win and keep the White House. Next, please. And as you can see from this graph, from the 1950s through to the late 60s, psychedelics enjoyed a short-lived relationship with psychology, psychiatry, and research, used most notably as an aid for psychotherapy for the treatment of mood disorders and alcohol dependence. Drugs such as LSD showed initial therapeutic promise before prohibition legislation in the 1960s effectively ended all major psychedelic research programs. So following this prohibition, which was part of the war on drugs, Nixon's war on drugs, there was a really steep decline in academic publications and new knowledge generation in this space. Over the last 2 decades, really since the early 1990s, we've witnessed what we call the psychedelic renaissance. With a steady revival of psychedelic research, we now see hundreds, if not thousands, of new publications coming from highly regarded institutions around the world. Next slide, please. This slide shows that of all the recreational drugs people take, both LSD and psilocybin are the safest in terms of active or lethal dose ratio and dependency potential. Next slide, please. This slide highlights the notable active research institutions and not-for-profits globally working in this space. I'll quickly now move on to what the Australian landscape looks like. So next slide, please. So if you haven't noticed, Australia is in the midst of a mental health crisis. The Australian Bureau of Statistic figures from 2017 to 2018 show that mental health is the most common chronic condition in Australia. 4.8 million, that's around 20% of Australians, had a mental or behavioural condition. 3.2 million, around 13% of Australians, had an anxiety-related disorder. Indeed, the COVID pandemic also intensified these issues, with the Medical Journal of Australia reporting approximately 25% of Australians reported mild to moderate symptoms of depression or anxiety during first month of stage 2 restrictions. During 2020, 4.7 million prescriptions for antidepressants were issued in Australia. Next, please. The mental health crisis in Australia and indeed globally has been exacerbated by a series of treatment-resistant depression or conditions. However, in 2018, a breakthrough designation issued by the US FDA for the treatment of treatment-resistant depression using psilocybin reflected this drug's potential to treat resistant psychiatric disorders. The breakthrough designation was granted after preliminary clinical evidence suggested the treatment had potential to be demonstrably better than current treatments. Interest intensified following this designation, with psychedelic research conducted at some of the world's premier medical institutions, as I highlighted earlier in this presentation. Next slide, please. And then, in a landmark ruling in early 2023, the Therapeutic Goods Administration changed the classification of psilocybin and MDMA to allow prescribing by authorised psychiatrists in Australia. This ruling was groundbreaking, as it meant Australia had become the first country in the world to recognise psychedelics as medicines. It has paved the way for the use of psilocybin for the treatment of treatment-resistant depression and MDMA for PTSD outside the clinical trial environment. And this occurred from the 1st of July 2023. For Reset, the ruling uniquely positioned this company compared to other psychedelic companies in Australia, given both our Schedule 9 licence, authorising us to cultivate and supply psilocybin, and our clinical trial, which enabled Reset to validate its treatment protocols for the use of psilocybin in connection with treatment-resistant depression. The ruling also allowed Reset to accelerate and implement its commercialisation plans far earlier than expected. Next slide, please. So just quickly, this slide shows some of the other key participants in the Australian market, including clinical drug developers, not-for-profits and research institutions dedicated to psychedelic therapies. Now let's move away from the broader Australian market to focus specifically on Reset. Reset was established in 2021 as a wholly owned subsidiary of global vertically integrated medicinal cannabis company Little Green Pharma to capitalise on LGP's knowledge, track record, infrastructure and regulatory approvals to pursue a business in the field of psychedelic medicines. And over the past 2 years, Reset has been the forefront of the development of the psychedelic industry in Australia and has assembled a highly credentialed team of experts. Our 4 pillars are: 1, as a mental health care provider, we are one of the first clinics in Australia and the only with an insurance company partnership. 2, we are undertaking a clinical trial to test, refine and develop best practice psilocybin protocols and secure authorised prescriber approvals for Reset clinics. 3, we are cultivating psilocybin mushrooms by leveraging LGP's Schedule 9 licensing and know-how in producing botanical GMP medicines. And 4, we are manufacturing from 2 GMP sites, leveraging LGP's GMP expertise and licenses to import or supply psilocybin products. Next slide, please. And Reset boasts a highly experienced and credentialed team, which comprises the Honourable Cheryl Edwards as Chairperson and Independent Non-Executive Director, Angus Caithness as Executive Director, Sean Duffy as Non-Executive Director, and myself as COO. Our team brings a wealth of experience to all aspects of the business, from significant board experience through to corporate finance and consulting experience in Australia and overseas, as well as the health sector experience across clinical, academic, corporate and startup settings. Next slide, please. Reset has appointed a highly credentialed clinical advisory board with an emphasis on expertise in the delivery of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. Dr. Stephen Bright is a psychologist and currently senior lecturer of addiction at Edith Cowan University in Western Australia. Dr. Bright is also the vice president and a founding member of PRISM, the highly regarded psychedelic research in science and medicine group. He will be leading our therapeutic team in Reset's clinical trial to test, refine, and develop best practice protocols for use in clinic. Renee Harvey is a clinical psychologist in private practice in Melbourne. Renee has extensive experience in the delivery of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, having previously been a member of the patient-facing therapy team for the psilocybin-based trials conducted by Imperial College London. Now, over the next few slides, I'll expand on Reset's 4 pillars. Next slide, please. As a mental health care provider, Reset has secured a long-term lease for our mental health clinic located in a prime Perth medical precinct. Reset has secured pharmaceutical psilocybin to supply clinical patients under the TGA Authorised Prescriber Scheme and is currently progressing Authorised Prescriber Scheme approvals for prescribing psychiatrists. We anticipate first clinical patients in the first quarter of next calendar year. Next slide, please. A little bit more about our alliance with HAF. We entered this strategic alliance in March of this year to establish a proof of concept mental health treatment facility with capability to deliver psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy to eligible patients. HIF is providing $250,000 in funding to cover fit-out costs. Reset and HIF are also undertaking a concurrent health economics study to provide HIF with real-world data necessary to inform potential member coverages for this treatment. In addition, Reset and HIF have agreed to a period of exclusivity to negotiate development of further treatment centres based on the initial concept. Next slide, please. Reset will be undertaking WA's first clinical trial using psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy for the treatment-resistant depression, with one of Australia's most respected psychiatrists, Professor Sean Hood, as principal investigator, and Reset Advisory Board member Dr. Stephen Bright leading the clinical therapeutic team. The trial is expected to commence before the end of 2023 and builds on clinical therapy protocols used in successful international clinical trials, with plans to investigate novel aspects of psychotherapy protocols and validate protocols for Reset's mental health clinics. Importantly, the clinical trial is also eligible for R&D rebates set at a rate of 43 cents per dollar. Next slide, please. In terms of cultivation, Reset is leveraging LGP's licensed manufacturer, as well as its experience and expertise in production of botanical drug products. Reset has in operation a purpose-built mushroom cultivation facility co-located at LGP's existing Schedule 9 licensed cannabis cultivation site in Western Australia. Cultivation of psilocybin mushrooms commenced in the first half of 2023, with the first batch of psilocybin mushrooms already produced. And this first batch is being used for chemical, physical analysis, extraction, method testing, and in-house process validation. Next slide, please. Reset is progressing a GMP license to manufacture psilocybin for human consumption within manufacturing facilities co-located within Reset's mental health clinic in a prime Perth medical precinct. A separate agreement with LGP grants exclusive access to LGP's GMP manufacturing facility for psilocybin production if required. The first shipment of psilocybin has recently been successfully imported for use in Reset's clinical trial and mental health clinic. Next slide, please. In summary, Reset is at the forefront of Australia's psychedelic industry for a number of reasons. We have a mental health clinic open to patients early next year. We have a clinical trial using psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy for treatment-resistant depression commencing this current quarter. We've also imported GMP psilocybin for clinical trial and clinical use. We're the only company with an insurance fund partner. We have already cultivated psilocybin mushrooms in our purpose-built Schedule 9 facility, and we have access to 2 GMP manufacturing facilities and are progressing psilocybin GMP licensing. Next slide, please. So over the next few slides, I'll now discuss Reset's plans for a demerger from LGP and the associated capital raise. Next slide. The demerger of Reset from LGP and proposed capital raise will provide the company with a dedicated capital, management team and facilities to advance the development of mental health treatment using psychedelic medicines. The demerger will be effected by distributing shares in the company currently held by LGP to eligible LGP shareholders by way of a pro rata in-species distribution on the basis of one Reset share for approximately every 30 LGP shares held on the in-species record date. The outcome of this process is that eligible LGP shareholders will hold the same percentage ownership in Reset as they do in LGP prior to the company's proposed capital raising. LGP will be convening a meeting of its members on the 11th of December 2023 to seek the necessary approvals under sections 256B and 256C of the Corporations Act for the in-species distribution. Reset is also seeking to raise up to $2 million by the issuing of up to 10 million shares under the offers. The company reserves the right to accept oversubscriptions under the public offer of up to $1 million. Any shares not taken up pursuant to priority and the chairman's offer will form a shortfall and will be offered under the public offer. The process from the offer will be used to fund clinical setup and ongoing operational costs, fund the clinical trial, psilocybin cultivation and production, research and development, and provide working capital. Further information is available if you refer to LGP's investor website and Reset Mind Sciences website. Next slide, please. The offers under the proposed capital raise consist of a priority offer to LGP shareholders of up to 5 million shares at 20 cents per share to raise up to $1 million. Public offer of up to 2.5 million shares to raise up to $500,000 to the general public in Australia and selected investors in the UK, Switzerland, and with the ability to accept oversubscriptions of up to $1 million. And a shares list of up to 2.5 million shares to raise up to $500,000 to select investors in Australia, the UK, and Switzerland who have received an invitation from the chairperson or the company. The offers opened on the 17th of November this year and closed on the 1st of December 2023 and are partially underwritten by Little Green Pharma. Next slide, please. Briefly, this slide shows how to apply under the priority offer and public offer via the relevant applications located on the registry website. Completed applications and payments must be received by Atomic Group by closing date 1st of December 2023. Next slide, please. This slide sets out indicative timetable and key offer details. Next slide, please. And finally, we'd like to leave you with Reset's investment opportunity. We believe Reset Mind Sciences is ideally placed to play a leading role in the evolution of the mental health industry in Australia. Our first mover status has allowed us to attract the highest quality organisations and individuals as potential partners. And on that note, I'd like to thank you for your time, and I'd now hand back to David for any questions.
Thanks, Leon. A great presentation and clearly a very interesting topic that will continue to evolve over time as it becomes more and more understood and embedded into the Australian investment landscape. Now, we do have a number of questions. As I said, if you do have a question, use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, type a question in and I'll get to it if time allows. But a number of questions have come through already. So, Leon, we'll jump straight into it. Why is Reset growing mushrooms when synthetic psilocybin is available?
That's a good question, David. So certainly Reset, as we've said, has leveraged some of the strong history and expertise of Little Green Pharma and the natural botanical extract manufacturing skills that they have. But we really see naturally derived psilocybin as potentially offering choice, as offering choice to both prescribers and patients in this space. We obviously also see it as a potential market opportunity for both the domestic and international markets as they unfold.
And what challenges do you think the business faces in integrating psychedelics into the mainstream healthcare? Obviously, HIF has come on board as a supporter, but there's going to be a lot of challenges. And how do you think you're going to be able to overcome those?
There are always new challenges. There's a degree of stigma we've discussed in this space related to the historical context, related to recreational use versus medicinal use. I think one of the biggest challenges is perhaps an opportunity in itself, and that's really about the integration of the medical health system to actually come together to provide solutions to what are really complex health problems. You know, the mental health system, the health system in general, is very siloed. It's not typically used to working together. Where the opportunity lies in terms of this new regulatory space is really that our regulator has mandated that we need to work together. You know, there needs to be a dedicated wraparound care service. We need to have psychiatrists working with psychologists. So in many ways, I think that is our one of our challenges, but I think it's also our greatest opportunity, because what we know is that complex disease requires complex solutions and multi-dimensional, multifaceted solutions to meet some of those.
Now, this one might be a little bit early to answer, but psychedelic-assisted therapy is estimated to cost $25,000 or more. How will people be able to afford this?
It's so, yes, the number of 25,000, I've heard 30,000, I've heard 40,000. These are really back of the envelope estimates at this point. And I'm actually not really sure of the origins of those numbers. What we do know is that unsubsidized, unrebated health care costs money. And so that's why we're working with partners such as HIF and health insurers to really be able to ultimately hopefully be able to provide rebates in that space. We're also engaging in health economic research to be able to refine the known costs associated with this and determine whether there are health economic advantages to these treatments over conventional standard treatments. But I think just if we talk about costs for a little while, we know that these treatment-resistant depression disorders, we know that PTSD costs society a lot in general anyway. So, you know, it's estimated in America alone that each year $210 billion is lost to the economy just for treatment-resistant depression alone. Those proportions are similar in the Australian landscape. We know that there is significant cost in terms of absenteeism, presenteeism, and also just a significant reduction in quality of life of these people, these patients who are suffering from these really hard to treat disorders. So I think there is, there's work to be done in terms of being able to make sure that there is access, affordability for these conditions. We're working very hard in that space. So I'm optimistic that this will be something that will be accessible by the majority of people who need this treatment.
And what about the stages to commercialisation? Understand it is early and there's a lot of work to be done and a lot to be proven, but what do you see as the key stages to commercialisation or generating sales in the psilocybin space?
So we believe we're very fit and ready to go in terms of that capability. We've been really fortunate in that we've had some significant partnerships over the journey with key opinion leaders in this space. We've developed a clinical trial that is really facilitating refinement of protocols that will translate to the clinic. We're also being able to train psychologists and psychiatrists with the use of these medicines in that clinical trial domain. So that will then enable some of those psychiatrists to be eligible for authorized prescriber status, which would then enable them to prescribe in the community, in the real world. And we see our clinics and those in the real world healthcare opportunities as being that step to commercialization. So for us, that's very tangible. That is not very far off. We anticipate to have clinical operations within the first half of next year.
And finally, the HIF partnership, what does it mean and what does it bring?
It brings a tremendous amount of knowledge in the health sector space. It brings the opportunity to be able to partner with a insurer that understands these new interventions. It also enables the access to potentially should there be merit for these treatments. It offers the opportunity for potentially rebating in this space, but there's some work to go in that before we could get to that stage.
Well, we're out of time, out of questions. Lots of questions have come through, and Leon, thanks for the presentation and thanks for answering all of those questions. I think it gives certainly investors a greater understanding of the Reset Mind Sciences business and its path forward, particularly around the proposed demerger. So thank you for presenting. And I would like to remind everybody that a copy of this presentation has been lodged with the ASX. If you'd like further information about the demerger process, please read the relevant filings on the ASX under the ticker code for Little Green Pharma LGP, including the prospectus, which outlines all the risks and further information and timeline in relation to the proposed demerger process. So, Leon, thanks for your time. Everybody, thanks for watching, and we'll be back soon. But first, finally, keep an eye on Reset Mind Sciences, initially through Little Green Pharma, clearly along an interesting timeline ahead with imminent news flow and exciting things coming in the early stages of next year. We'll be sure to watch with interest. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.